I'll go back to what Dad said to me when he goes, but how do you know that what is going on here is good? You know, really simple questions like that are very profound. You might not get an immediate response out of someone, but they'll think about it. They'll think about it.
Well, welcome to another edition of AP's Profiles in Christian Living. My name is Mark Powell, and my very, very special guest with me this morning is a lady named Anita, who has a fascinating story about coming out of the occult and all the practices therein, and is now a follower of Jesus. Welcome, Anita. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you. It's awesome.
Now, how does somebody get involved in the occult? Is there a childhood trauma? Was there some sort of experience? What led you into this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I get asked this question all the time, Mark, because a lot of people, especially Christians, can't understand how that would happen. So if I was to go back to my childhood, obviously in the beginning, if I was to go back to my childhood, I would say that from my earliest memories, I was very aware of a spiritual realm. And my family wasn't Christian, so there was no one there to guide me in my interest in a spiritual realm. I was also naturally a very inquisitive child, so I was always wanting to know what was the reason why for things, you know what I mean? So I guess that interest, that understanding that there was a spiritual realm and my inquisitiveness, I just sort of ended up exploring these things. But because there was no one there to guide me. In fact, what they did is encourage me in my enthusiasm and my inquisitiveness, not knowing where that might lead. And so, I was given books as a child, that made this all possible for me to explore from the earliest times.
Okay, so how old were you when this started happening?
Yeah, so probably my earliest memories is around 7, 8, and I was doing seances at a very early age, actually. But it was bizarrely enough, it was a documentary that I saw as a young girl on Uri Geller. I don't know if you recall.
Yeah, the guy that could bend spoons.
Yeah, that's right. So whether or not he could or not is beside the point. What that did for me is really foster an enthusiasm to explore metaphysical or interesting things that weren't necessarily explained. It was sort of that mysterious thing. So it started off with Yuri, and then it just opened up for me. And, the local palm reader at the market, I was always at her stall, sitting beside her, begging her to read my palm, begging her to show me how she did it. And, Satan is very cunning, starts off being kind of a cute kind of a thing, and then just as you move through life, it's just like, what about this now? What about that? And that just moved from one to the other as I grew up. And for birthdays and Christmas and anything was given to me Anita's such an inquisitive child, and this is, very, it's not our thing, but we're going to help her with her interest in this with no real consideration to where that would lead.
So I can imagine getting into the occult is sort of like going down a slippery dip.
Absolutely.
You start off and there's a bit of a thrill, but at a certain point you're thinking, I'm out of control here.
Yeah.
Where was it that you went, whoa, I'm really dealing with spiritual realities here and powers that are scaring me?
It wasn't until my early 20s that what I considered to be, because obviously when you're a practitioner in the cult, everything that you're doing is giving you a certain amount of experiences. Otherwise, you wouldn't be hooked on it. There's something there, right? There's power. You can do things. They materialise. You can make things happen, manipulate circumstances. But it wasn't until my early 20s that I started to think something's not right here. All that glitters is not gold. What I'm considering, what I've always thought to be good, might not necessarily be as it seems. And that was a sort of a start of a journey to search for truth and what was truth.
Okay, so let me drill down on that a little bit because the Bible says in 2 Corinthians that Satan masquerades as an angel of the light. At what point did you think, I've been deceived?
Yeah.
These good spirits, these good angels are actually demonic.
Yeah, so it It was a gradual process, and I think, if I was to look back all from my childhood right through to my early 20s, there were definitely Christians dotted throughout my life, and they later told me they had prayed for me. There was, when I went to college, when I was boarding, I was placed in a dorm with two Christian women who would watch me do my tarot cards, and they were praying behind the scenes. So I feel that, along the way, God had his hand on me, and it was just a matter of time really until what happened when I was in England. I was in England at the time, and I was part of a spiritualist church. The church that I was part of, the home group and the small group, they became quite manipulative and they wanted to control me. And I started to feel a bit uneasy about that control. So when I wanted to retreat from being involved in that particular church, the spiritual side of things started to turn a little bit nasty, and the experience that I'd had previously, which was all great and fantastic and things, that started to turn a little bit. And at that point, I started to get at what I would best describe as a little recurring vision, which was a normal, my arm, it was just like a perfectly normal patch of skin on my arm would peel back, and this is just like a type of an imagination, but it was recurring, and underneath was just putrid, dying flesh. And because I was quite symbolic, I was always thinking of interpreting my signs and whatnot, I started to get this idea that things were not what they seemed, and I started to explore the idea of what was possibly what I had considered truth was not truth, and that needed more exploration. And, of course, the interesting thing was the spiritualist church at the time would encourage their members, and we could talk a bit more about what the spiritualist church believes, but they would encourage their members, if they had a dilemma or a problem in their life, to actually use the Holy Bible as like an oracle, kind of hold this question in your mind, flick it open, land on a scripture, and there shall be your answer. So I did that at this particular time, and it landed on, you seek me and you shall find me. And so I decided to go on a journey of seeking truth, no matter what that would end up at, to be brave enough to actually explore the idea of truth, even if what I ended up with was contrary to everything that I'd believed. And I believe that genuine search for truth has ultimately obviously led me to Jesus, because he is the truth.
Now, just before we get to him, because obviously he's the answer, I just want to backtrack a little bit, because I want to ask you, there'll be some people watching or listening to this that would say, well, maybe it was all in her mind. What would you say to that sort of person? Are there real spiritual realities? And if so, how would you describe them in terms of your experience? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. So if I was to explain to the Christian, what it's like for a practitioner of the occult or the New Age, those people that are travelling in these paths, their experiences are every bit as real as what the Christian is travelling down with Jesus. Like, it actually happens. These things actually happens in terms of experiences. But whether or not it is good, whether or not it is true and holy and is, ultimately going to lead to something that is good, that is the other question entirely. And that was what I was trying to dig away at, to find out whether I had no doubt that these experiences were happening and that there was power, a certain amount of power in what I was doing, but was that good? And in fact, my father, who came over to visit me in England, came with me to one of those church services. He didn't like it, and afterwards challenged me on that. He said, "But how do you know that this is good? How do you know?"
So I'm intrigued, and I have to ask, what were those church services for a spiritualist like, and what were they teaching?
Yeah, sure. So the spiritualist church essentially believes that there's a realm called spirit, and that you can connect with spirit and get your answers in life, be led by spirit, and get your answers in life to live a good life, quote unquote. And it's a very old kind of movement. It's still very big in the UK, and basically mediums would get up at every church that they would say the Lord's Prayer. They would use the Bible. Yeah. They believed in Jesus, not as Lord. They believed him as a very wise man. And so that's that little deception. So I believe because they, they're reading from the Bible, this is good. This is, the Bible's a holy book. But the mediums would often deliver messages from the platform, channeling entities to give messages to people in the church who often, for the most part, were desperate to hear messages of comfort about if they were going to receive a physical healing, what their future might hold in, and warnings. So, it's quite an addictive thing to belong to something like this because you are waiting all the time for messages. You're waiting all the time to hear from spirit, and you're trying to tune yourself to spirit and trying to ascend higher in your spiritual understanding, and fine-tuning yourself and becoming sort of more and more spiritual, so to speak. Yeah.
Okay, difficult question. Do you think looking back on those times you were possessed by a demon?
Yeah, I was definitely look, I have come across people who were much more possessed, if you want to put it, than I was then. But there was no doubt in my mind that I was definitely infiltrated and, definitely impacted by demons. And it was getting worse. It was definitely getting worse. So from my earliest, the early days of seances right through to doing tarot and becoming an eclectic witch and the spiritualist, it was just getting more and more, and I was getting more and more heady in my experiences. So the more experiences that I was fed, I was becoming more prideful because I was feeling that I was becoming more spiritual. Yeah.
But what do you mean then it was getting worse?
Well, in terms of them taking over a bit, like I felt like I was the actual Anita was becoming less and less. It's the actual counterfeit of Christianity, right?
Yeah.
Because it
was like they were decreating you out of God's image.
Exactly. So the Anita. So, I remember looking in the mirror one time during that time, I was like, who have you become? Looking at myself, who have you become? I don't actually like looking at you anymore, So whilst I was getting more and more spiritual and I was getting fed a lot of flattering, you're so talented, you're channeling so well and, you're hearing spirit and you're giving these amazing, miraculous prophetic words to people that are coming true and all of this, I was feeling less and less real.
Okay,
Yeah.
so here's the key question. How did you meet Jesus, the real Jesus?
Yeah.
And what happened in terms of that break with the past? Take us through that.
Yeah. So I decided that things were getting a little bit out of control when I was living in England and a part of the spiritualist church. They were becoming extremely manipulative, and I decided that the best thing for me to do at that time was to break away from the spiritualist church and actually come back to Australia. Their reaction to me doing that was really severe. I was brought before their board, I was disciplined, and I was threatened and said that if you leave all spirit, you'll lose all your power. You will lose all of your where you've got to, right? So it was a threat. And at that point I thought to myself, you know what, I'm just not going to even care about if that happens, so be it. But it was actually a frightening thing to think that everything that I'd worked towards and where I was, that spirit, quote unquote, would leave me. So I felt quite vulnerable, but I decided to come back, and I got back to Melbourne. It was a very, very dark time in my life because I felt very alone, I felt very isolated, and I was very frightened that I was no longer having these spiritual. Bizarrely enough, I did feel as if the spiritual realm had left me, so I felt quite vulnerable on my own. And then through a series of events, I met I met a man that I came into a relationship with and became, he actually was a fairly advanced relation, became married to him, let's just put it that way. But he had walked away from the Lord. He was he grew up Christian and he walked away. And his mother decided that if her son, she was a very committed Christian, she decided that if her son was to end up with me, she would be praying for me. So she prayed steadfastly for this partner that her son was going to end up with. And I think through her prayers, just amazing committed woman to prayer, I had 3 dreams, three significant dreams, and because I was a dream interpreter as well, I placed a lot of emphasis on my dreams. These dreams just shook me to my core, and it was Jesus literally reaching out and asking me to come to him. And so it was a year of battling this idea that Jesus is actually the only way. This is the big thing for New Agers or anyone that has played with this idea of subjective truth. Truth is anything that I want it to be confronted with Jesus is the only way. That was a big battle for me. But finally, I just knew within my heart of hearts that through, praying in my own way at the time, that Jesus was who he said he was, and I just gave my life to him. But that still wasn't easy as well, because there was a process then of having to come away from the old and give up a lot and burn stuff and all of that and renunciations. And
Yeah,
prayers,
because how
confessions.
important is that? Like, how important is it to get rid of tarot cards?
Yes,
And
super important.
even though there might be a lot of nostalgia.
Yeah.
It's more than that, isn't it?
It is more than that. So the cards themselves, the pieces of cardboard, what they're made out of they're not actually evil, obviously, in themselves, but it is really reflective of the place that it held in my heart. If I wasn't able to give it up, you cannot serve 2 masters. If I believed that Jesus was who he said he is, that he's the only way, I do not need these things anymore. Not only that, they are divinational tools. I took it very seriously that divination is sin and is offensive to God. So, I had to burn them. I burnt them. I threw away everything, the books, everything that I had collected, and it was an amazing feeling of just being part of that renewal process and just being free, literally free. It was a very, very powerful step. And we see that in Acts 19. They burnt the books on witchcraft and sorcery, and there's just something very significant about doing that.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or not even an analogy, application, because the total cost of the books came to some extraordinary
Huge.
figure.
Yeah.
Was that financially costly for you as well?
Yeah, it wasn't that easy because, you sort of plan, these books are my life's collection. I've gone over the years to esoteric bookshops. Some of them were very old, so I wrestled with that a little bit. The tarot cards were significant for me. I loved them a lot and I used them a lot, and travelling throughout Europe, they were very important to me, but it was, again, who is more important here? And I'm just going to give everything up to follow Jesus. That's what he's asked me to do. And so, a little bit of wrestling, but ultimately you just know that you have to do this.
So my next question's got 2 parts to it, and they're probably complementary.
Yeah.
And that is, can you describe to us really, I guess, was it a decisive moment when you come to meet Jesus? You're having these dreams, you're realising he's true. Was it a decisive moment where you turned? And what role did the local church play in that whole journey?
So there was a particular gentleman and his wife that were very instrumental for that at the time, and this is very, very key, I think, to what helped me. So I was exploring the idea of Jesus because I'd been having these dreams. I was living up in Queensland. I didn't have a job and I was quite bored, so I decided to do some volunteer work. Part of the volunteering work required me to do some training, and I went to the interview, and the man asked me a very odd question in my interview process. He paused and he said, "What's your spiritual beliefs?" And at the time I thought, what's that got to do with it? But anyway, so I remember answering him and, at the time I still considered myself to be quite a practitioner of occult, but I was, I was struggling because I had these dreams. And when I responded to him and to tell him what my spiritual beliefs were at the time, I knew within myself that I actually wasn't believing what I was saying anymore. It was just coming out robotically because that's what I'd been saying. I wasn't sure anymore. It was not sounding right. His reaction was key. He literally was not even perturbed at all. And he said, "I'm a Christian myself. Why don't you come to church on Sunday and afterwards come to a barbecue with my wife and I?" And I was so amazed because Christians in the past hadn't reacted to me like that in the past. And the fact that he just didn't even worry about it was amazing to me. So I took him up on that offer. I went to his church.
Wow.
I loved it. I went to the barbecue afterwards and they were so welcoming and lovely and praying for me. And just that kindness that they extended to me really was amazing for me to then continue go to the church and then ultimately hearing the gospel getting preached and really making that final decision to give my life to the Lord. So that was a key moment, was the kindness shown to me by Christians.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here. Okay. You're at church.
Yeah.
Do you remember any truths from the Bible that particularly convicted you?
Yeah, definitely. And that was actually something that what it was sin. Yeah, was the idea that we're all sinners and we need our sin. God can't face our sin. We need that sin to be taken away from us before we can come before a perfect and just God. And the whole idea of sin, it's actually quite offensive to anyone that is, making their own way in life and creating their truth. But it really convicted me, and it was fitting with where I was going anyway, that all was not right, that there is good and evil and there's some things that are good and some things that are not right. So sin, it was starting to hit home. But yeah, it was Jesus is the one, the only one to cover that sin of yours. Mm-hmm. You're a sinner. He's the only way to make good of this mess that has happened in mankind. Yeah. So that was a good message from the church, from that sermon, and yeah, it was really convicting, and yeah, so it was good.
I mean, okay, we know that divination.
Yeah.
God has very strong words to say, but it's even an abomination to him. But it's not just divination that is rebellion, is it? It's all forms of rejection.
Yeah.
How important was it for you to see that it wasn't just this thing that you had your identity in, but there was other things that you had to bring before him? Can you talk about that part of your journey?
Yeah, so obviously the big things for me, I suppose, was dealing in the occult. They were the initial things that I had to get right before the Lord. But then after that was a whole, God bringing up throughout the process of walking with him, well, what about, this of sexual sin? Let's look at this now. Let's look at that. And it just opens up, your eyes just get more and more opened to how grievous our actions are before the Lord. And it's not just this and it's not just that. It's a huge amount. And because it just gets so big, it's that whole thing of much sin, have you had, the more you understand your forgiveness.
Yeah, he has been forgiven much, loves much.
Yeah, that's right. So I started to feel quite incredulous with the understanding of how, in the miry clay I was, how could you have even looked at me, and pulled me out
Wow.
and showed me that irresistible grace.
It is an amazing thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is incredible. Yes. Psalm 40, isn't it? You lifted my feet out of the miry rock and set my feet on, the miry clay. And set my feet upon a rock.
Yeah, yeah.
I think you too did a great song about that. 40. For people that are still in the occult, or there might be some young people, particularly young girls watching this, and they're in that place where they know that they're torn. What would you say to them personally? And what would you say to the church in being able to help them?
Yeah. So especially for young girls, it's been, in the popular culture for a while, this idea that you can become a white witch and whatever, it is, they find it quite empowering. It's something that they can go to form an identity over, and that they've got to, they can do this and they can do that. But, I understand, because in a way there is a connection in there. You find connection. Everybody is longing to find connection with something, and everybody wants to feel as if they've got some amount of control over their life, right? But it is not going to eventuate in an everlasting joy. There is a time where there will be a knock on the door saying, these things that I gave you, we want some payback now. And yeah, that's quite a harsh thing to learn. It is. There's fun in the season of sin for a while, and
so you're talking particularly about the occult there, aren't you? There's fun in the season. There's gifts in inverted commas that they give you, but then you touched on something which I want to come back to. But then there's payback.
There is payback.
What are the things that they demand from you eventually?
Yourself, to serve them.
Right. And what does that look like?
So that means, well, let me think about that. Definitely trying to recruit into what you're doing, so influencing others,
So Satan, in one sense, is an evangelist.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Influence others to join what you're doing, to, make it sound glorious. And it's not just yourself anymore. So, okay, I've been giving you these things, these experiences, and you've been having fun with it. Now go out and tell others and bring others in a sense.
And that's really important to Satan. It's really important.
It's very important. The more he can get for himself. And now, with the occult, there's kind of these two it's the two sides of the path. So there's the left-hand path, they're called the LHP, Occult Practitioners, and then there's the right-hand side of the path. It's the same path but two edges of the path. The right-hand paths would be the ones that say that they're actually doing good, the quote-unquote white witches, whatever. And the left-hand side of the path are the dark practitioners,
who are intent on doing harm.
Definitely, yeah. Obviously, as Christians, we know that one path leads to the same place. It doesn't matter if you feel that you're doing good on it or bad. It'll end up in the same place unless you're on the narrow path of Christ. That Satan can tell you whatever you want to hear, just as long as you stay on that path.
What path were you on at that point?
That I was always a right-hand side of the path, thinking that I was doing good. Yeah, so. With the left-hand side, it just gets murky, and, it's all murky, but you don't really want to, go to and explore that, because it just is just like millions of rabbit holes and very, very harsh area to dwell in. So I was never on that side. But so when you are full of a bit of pride, thinking that you're doing good, it's sometimes even harder to think, well, why should I come off it? I'm actually not harming anybody or doing anything.
In a sense,
good.
You're even more deluded, aren't you?
Yeah, in a way. Yeah, because I'm doing good. I'm loving people still and whatnot. So yeah.
Okay, so if I can ask, how many years ago was this that you followed Jesus?
Yeah,
trusted in him?
So I have been a follower of Jesus now 24 years.
And what's your life look like since then?
Yeah, so sometimes God has dealt with me quite, let's just he's put his hand on this and let's get this sorted out now. And that's been some pretty hard lessons there. And then other times it's been just a long, beautiful time of grace and just let's move through this slowly. But overall, healing and open my eyes, and just joy. It's not all smooth sailing, but just that knowing that you have God with you, that eternal feeling of eternal knowledge that you know that you are safe with God and that you have an eternity to look forward to with him, and that he's the truth, and that he's trustworthy. And that's something that was always missing from when I was, traveling in those other paths, was because I had to find my own way and I had to figure it out. I was so alone in whatever I wanted kind of thing, and there's no...
See, that's interesting because one of my favourite verses in the Bible is Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 to 10. It talks about by grace we've been saved through faith. This is not from ourselves, the gift of God, so that no one can boast.
Yeah.
And then it says in verse 10, for we are God's workmanship created in Christ Jesus to do good works which he prepared in advance for us to do. What are the good works that you think Jesus has had for you to do, maybe even of late?
Yeah, so I think the good works that Jesus has had in advance for me to do is just share definitely my testimony of his grace with others, and to encourage others to understand that God's kindness which leads to repentance, is a good thing, and that is something that is very, very precious. And so I try and share that with people, just to love them where they're at, remembering what those Christians did for me. I didn't feel judged by them. I just felt loved by them, and I remember that, and so I feel that, that's a good work that I can extend in my own life towards those that are perhaps considering Jesus, especially if they're walking in the paths that I was walking in, but don't necessarily know how to kind of get there, or can they go to a church? Can they walk into a church? How are they going to be, received? Because obviously they're struggling and they're still doing these things, so they're just trying to work it out. So, yeah.
So give us some tips. Next Sunday, a young goth comes into church, dressed in head to toe from black, and you can tell that they're seeking, they were you 24 years ago.
Yeah.
What are you going to do as a Christian?
Yeah.
What should we do as a church?
It's really hard. It's almost cliche to just say, just love them, right? Just love them. What does that mean?
But it's true.
What does that mean? I think people often that are, they're very attuned and instinctively aware of how they appear or what they're saying, how people are going to react to it. Just be honest. I think honesty is really, really key, and just say, look, I don't understand really what you're doing, but I want to get to know you. I want to tell me about it even, what's maybe not the fine details, but just tell me a story, tell me a story, because with people that travel and all of us really, there's a desire for that connection, that just to be connected and just not feel judged. That again, it sounds cliche, don't judge, but it really is about just being authentic and not trying too hard, and if you don't understand, just say it. Tell me about yourself and show a real interest.
So you said something there which intrigued me, and you said you don't have to ask too many details. Why is that?
So there is a scripture. I'm not very good with just remembering, where scriptures are, but basically, keep what is keep what is hidden. Don't go exploring too much. God doesn't. So if I was to, I wouldn't feel comfortable talking now about everything that I used to do and the way to do divination or the way to do tarot. I wouldn't do that anyway. But when you're speaking to someone in the New Age, maybe it's more about, tell me why you like to do this. Tell me, how you got it, but not what you're doing. You don't need to know exactly what they're doing.
See, that's really, I think you're spot on there, because it does say, in the New Testament that it is shameful to even mention what is done in secret.
Yeah.
Is there a parallel here between, say, pornography, where you might be addicted to pornography, male or increasingly female, but to go too much into the gory details almost becomes tittillating, and almost actually becomes a temptation in and of itself. Is that the same, do you think, for the spirituality that is associated with the occult?
Yes, most definitely.
It's almost a lure.
Definitely. So, even for me to say to you in this interview that the power was real and real things happened. That's probably as far as I go, because you don't want to give any glory at all to what Satan can do, other than to recognise that people actually really do have real experiences. It's not an illusion. Well, in a sense it is. It's inverted. But what is happening when they're doing these things, and the responses and the impact that's happening is actually real. The demonic is real, the spiritual realm is real, but we don't want to go into it too much, because we don't want to give, all glory goes to God. We just want to get the person to focus on
that's brilliant.
The reason. You want to dig a little bit. And again, I'll go back to what Dad said to me when he goes, but how do you know that what is going on here is good? Really simple questions like that are very profound. You might not get an immediate response out of someone, but they'll think about it. They'll think about it. Or they might have a response that's an automatic reaction. Of course it's good or whatever, but they still possibly think about it, these ideas.
So just on that, tell me, what have you found that is so good about Jesus?
Oh, Jesus. Well, Jesus is just he's just the best friend. He's the most trusted friend that you can ever have. And whilst you will be betrayed and you will be let down, Jesus never lets you down, absolutely never lets you down. So it's just that 100% trust that you can have in Jesus, that it's the biggest comfort to you in life. And just getting to know him, and just as you walk with the Lord, he just becomes more and more beautiful as the time goes on, and king, and he's coming back. And that's just the great hope we have as well that's coming.
Okay, so you've been a Christian now, 24 years, and it all lived happily ever after. No, it's not like that at all. What have you found challenging about being a Christian?
Yeah, not everything, you have to let go of your plans, your hopes, your ambitions. You can still have desire, you can pray, but sometimes you won't have an answer to prayer for a long time. The battles, the persecution, the world will hate you. You have to learn how to stand for the Lord, and that can be hard, So
I'm going to ask you one final question.
Yeah.
And thank you. So many of your answers have been excellent and just so edifying to hear.
Glad you approve, Mark.
No, we're fellow followers of Jesus here.
Yeah.
What are you looking forward to the most about heaven?
I'd love to say my mansion that's being prepared, but no, just there'll be no sadness, no more grief, no more sorrow, and just the presence of perfection, and worshipping the Lord, and just beauty and justice.
Yeah. And any final word for somebody who's dabbling and who's thinking, oh, well, that's just your experience. What would you say to that person at that critical crossroads?
Yep. So stand at the crossroads and, have a look at the paths before you, and ask yourself the question, what is truth? Is what I am looking at, is what I believe the truth? Have the courage to ask the question, what is truth? And Jesus said, if you are genuine and you want to know the truth, you will find him. Now, be brave and go on that search for truth.
And even more incredibly too, just as incredibly, he says, and the truth will set you free.
And the truth will set you free indeed. And
Amen.
It's final, underscored.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm Mark Powell, and this has been another episode of AP's Profiles in Christian Living. I hope you've been as encouraged as I have, and I look forward to seeing you next time.